The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty fields of Verdun Prime as Thomas hauled another bucket of feed toward the cattle pens. His boots kicked up small clouds of red dirt with each step, and sweat already beaded on his forehead despite the early hour. At 19 years old, he had been doing this same routine for nearly 5 years now, ever since his parents died in a mining accident and left him with nothing but a job at the colony's livestock facility. The bioenhanced cattle lowed softly as he approached, their genetically modified bodies twice the size of ancient Earth cows. These creatures could survive on almost any planet and produced enough protein to feed a small city. Thomas poured the nutrient pellets into their feeding troughs and watched as they eagerly consumed their breakfast. He often wondered if they ever dreamed of something beyond these metal fences, just as he did. "Thomas, you're moving slower than usual today," called out Marcus from across the yard. The older man served as the facility supervisor and had been like a father figure to Thomas since his arrival. "Everything all right, son?" "Just thinking," Thomas replied, leaning against the fence post. "Do you ever wonder what's out there beyond this place? Beyond these fields and fences?" Marcus chuckled and shook his head. "Boy, you've got stars in your eyes again. This is honest work, good work. Not everyone gets to help feed the galaxy." Thomas nodded, but the feeling wouldn't leave him alone. Something deep inside told him he was meant for more than shoveling feed and cleaning pens. He had strange dreams sometimes, visions of vast spaces filled with light and creatures he couldn't quite remember when he woke up. The colony's doctor, Helen Foster, said it was probably just stress from working long hours. Around midday the ground began to vibrate. At first, Thomas thought it was just another transport ship landing at the colony's spaceport. But the trembling grew stronger, making the cattle nervous and causing them to move restlessly in their pens. The metal fencing rattled and several animals began making distressed sounds. "Marcus, do you feel that?" Thomas called out, steadying himself against a fence post as the vibrations intensified. Before Marcus could answer, a deep rumbling sound emerged from beneath the earth itself. The ground split open near the eastern edge of the colony, releasing a column of glowing green gas that rose high into the atmosphere. The crack in the earth widened, revealing depths that seemed to go down forever. More fissures appeared across the landscape, each one releasing the same luminescent gas. The air began to shimmer with an otherworldly light, and Thomas felt something stirring in his chest, like a warm current flowing through his blood. "Everyone to the emergency shelters." Elizabeth Blackwood's voice echoed across the colony through the public address system. As the settlement leader, she had drilled them many times for various disasters, but this was unlike anything in their emergency protocols. Colonists ran in all directions, grabbing children and essential supplies as they headed for the reinforced underground bunkers. But Thomas found himself walking toward the nearest fissure instead of away from it. His feet moved without conscious thought, drawn by something he couldn't explain. The first dragon emerged as Thomas reached the edge of the glowing crack. Its crystalline head appeared first, followed by a neck that seemed to go on forever. Scales that looked like living gemstones caught and reflected the strange light from the earth's depths. When the creature finally pulled itself completely free, Thomas realized it was larger than any building in the colony. The dragon's eyes blazed like twin suns, and when they focused on Thomas, he felt a jolt of recognition that made his knees weak. This magnificent being looked at him not with the cold stare of a predator, but with something that felt almost like relief. More dragons emerged from other fissures around the colony. Some were deep blue like ocean depths, others gleamed silver like starlight, and a few shimmered with colors that Thomas had no names for. Each one was unique, yet they all shared the same crystalline beauty and overwhelming presence. While screams echoed from the direction of the colony as people fled to safety, Thomas stood perfectly still as the first dragon lowered its massive head until they were at eye level. The creature was so close he could see his reflection in its glowing eyes, and he could feel heat radiating from its crystalline scales. Then came the voice, not heard with his ears but felt directly in his mind. It was ancient and powerful yet somehow gentle. "We have waited so long, young heir. The blood of the architects flows within you." Thomas opened his mouth to ask what that meant, but more words flooded his consciousness before he could speak. "You are the one we have been guarding these chambers for. The one chosen to awaken us from our long sleep. The galaxy has forgotten the truth, but you will help them remember." Around him, the other dragons had formed a protective circle, their heads all turned toward Thomas with the same expression of recognition and respect. He reached out with a trembling hand and touched the nearest dragon's snout. Its scales were warm and seemed to pulse with inner light at his touch. In that moment, Thomas felt his entire world change. The simple stable boy who had spent his life caring for cattle suddenly understood that his real purpose was far greater than he had ever imagined. These magnificent creatures had been waiting for him, and somehow, he was meant to lead them. 3 days after the dragons emerged, Dr. James Crawford arrived on Verdant Prime with a team of coalition scientists. His transport ship landed carefully at the colony's edge, keeping maximum distance from the massive crystalline creatures that now rested peacefully in the surrounding fields. Thomas watched from his position near the largest dragon as uniformed researchers unloaded their equipment with nervous efficiency. "Stay close to the dragons," Thomas told his friend Peter, who had refused to hide in the shelters like most other colonists. "They won't hurt anyone, but they don't like strangers getting too near without me." Dr. Crawford approached slowly, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. Behind him walked Helen Foster, the colony's doctor who had volunteered to help with the research, and William Roberts, a neural specialist from the Coalition's Science Division. "Thomas, I'm Dr. Crawford," the scientist said, stopping about 20 feet away. "We're here to help understand what's happening. Can you tell me how you're able to communicate with these creatures?" Thomas looked at the dragon beside him, feeling the warm presence in his mind that had become as familiar as his own thoughts. "They talk to me in my head. They say I have something called architect blood." The research team exchanged glances. William Roberts pulled out a small scanning device and pointed it toward Thomas. "May I take some readings? I promise it won't hurt." The scanner beeped and chirped for several minutes while Thomas stood still. When William looked at the results, his face went pale. "Dr. Crawford, you need to see this. His brain activity is completely abnormal. The neural pathways are firing in patterns I've never seen before." Helen stepped forward with her own medical scanner. "Thomas, I've been your doctor for 3 years, but these readings show genetic markers that weren't there in your last physical exam. It's like your DNA is changing." Over the following days, the scientists set up a research camp near the dragon site. They discovered that whenever Thomas touched one of the creatures, both his brain activity and the dragon's energy output increased dramatically. The connection seemed to work both ways, with information flowing between them like water through a pipe. "Can you show us what you see when you connect with them?" Dr. Crawford asked during one of their daily sessions. Thomas placed his hand on the dragon's warm scales and immediately felt his consciousness expand. Through the creature's ancient memories, he saw vast cities floating among the stars, filled with beings of pure light who shaped worlds with their thoughts alone. He saw gardens that covered entire planets and machines that could create new suns. "The architects," Thomas whispered, his eyes glowing faintly with the same light as the dragon's. "They built everything. All the worlds where people live now, they made them perfect for life." The visions showed him more. The architects had traveled across the galaxy millions of years ago, finding dead planets and transforming them into paradises. They left the dragons behind as guardians, sleeping deep underground until the day when an heir would awaken them. But what happened to the architects themselves? Helen asked, studying the readings from Thomas's neural interface session. The answer came through darker memories that made Thomas shudder. War had swept across the galaxy as younger species grew jealous of architect power. Instead of learning from their benefactors, they had chosen to destroy them. Even early humans had joined the hunt, helping to erase all traces of the civilization that had given them their new homes among the stars. "They killed them all," Thomas said, tears running down his cheeks as he experienced the ancient genocide through dragon memories. The people living on architect worlds turned against them. They wanted the power but not the responsibility that came with it. William's scanners detected massive energy buildups in all the dragons whenever these painful memories surfaced. "Thomas, I think you should disconnect. Their emotional responses are affecting local electromagnetic fields." But Thomas had seen something else in the depths of dragon memory. The architects hadn't entirely died. Before their physical forms were destroyed, they had transferred their consciousness into quantum storage matrices hidden throughout the galaxy. The dragons weren't just guardians of empty ruins, they were protectors of sleeping minds waiting for resurrection. "They're still alive," Thomas announced to the research team. "Not their bodies but their spirits, their knowledge, everything that made them who they were. The dragons have been keeping them safe." Dr. Crawford looked worried as he reviewed the day's data. "Thomas, I need to report these findings to Coalition Command. They'll want to study this phenomenon and they'll want to meet you." Emma, Thomas's girlfriend who worked in the colony's communications center, had been monitoring all transmissions to and from the research camp. That evening, she found Thomas sitting beside his dragon companion under the stars. "The messages going out aren't just scientific reports," she warned him. They're talking about you like you're a weapon they can use. Admiral Robert Harrington is already asking questions about controlling the dragons. Thomas felt his dragon friend's concern flow through their mental link. The creature showed him images of warships approaching through space, their weapons charged and ready. The peaceful time of discovery was ending, and soon he would have to choose between hiding his growing abilities or standing up to those who would misuse them. What am I supposed to do? Thomas asked the dragon silently. The answer came back immediately, filled with ancient wisdom and patient strength. What the architects would have done. Protect those who cannot protect themselves and teach those willing to learn. Admiral Robert Harrington stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sovereign, watching Verdun Prime grow larger on the view screen. Behind him, 12 coalition warships maintained tight formation, their weapon systems powered and ready. The Admiral had fought pirates, rebels and hostile alien species across 3 decades of military service, but nothing had prepared him for reports of a human who could command ancient war machines. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface," reported Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from the sensor station. "The dragon creatures are definitely artificial constructs, but their power output exceeds our entire fleet combined." Harrington's weathered face remained calm, though inside he felt deeply troubled. The Coalition Council had been very clear in their orders. The young man named Thomas represented either the greatest weapon humanity had ever discovered or the greatest threat to galactic peace. Either way, he needed to be brought under Coalition control immediately. On the planet below, Thomas felt the approaching ships long before they appeared in the sky. His connection with the dragons had grown stronger each day, and through their ancient sensors, he could see the armed fleet moving toward his world like a storm front. "They're coming," he told Peter, who had stayed by his side throughout the strange events of the past week. "The Coalition wants to take me away." Peter looked up at the clear morning sky, seeing nothing yet but knowing his friend's abilities had proven accurate before. "Maybe you should hide. Go into the mountains with the dragons until they leave." But Thomas shook his head. The dragons had been showing him more memories, teaching him about the responsibilities that came with architect heritage. Running away would solve nothing, and innocent colonists might get hurt if the situation escalated. Emma joined them, her face pale with worry. "I intercepted more communications from the fleet. They're not planning to negotiate. Admiral Harrington has orders to arrest you by any means necessary." The Coalition ships descended through the atmosphere in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the sunlight. They landed in the fields surrounding the colony, forming a loose circle around the area where the dragons rested. Hundreds of Marines poured out of the transports, establishing a perimeter with weapons drawn. Admiral Harrington emerged from his command ship wearing full battle armor, flanked by 2 squads of elite troops. He was a tall man with gray hair and cold blue eyes that had seen too many wars. As he approached the dragon's site, Thomas walked forward to meet him halfway. "You must be Thomas," Harrington said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "I'm Admiral Harrington, Coalition Defense Command. By order of the Galactic Council, you're coming with us for questioning and evaluation." Thomas felt the dragons stirring behind him, their crystalline forms beginning to glow brighter as they sensed the hostile intentions of the armed soldiers. "I haven't done anything wrong, Admiral. I'm just trying to understand what's happening to me." "That's exactly what we intend to find out," Harrington replied. "Your ability to control these weapons poses a significant security risk. We need to study you and these creatures in a controlled environment." Dr. Crawford, who had been working with Thomas all week, stepped forward. "Admiral, with respect, Thomas isn't a prisoner. He's been cooperating fully with our research. There's no need for this show of force." Harrington's expression didn't change. "Doctor, you've seen what these dragons can do. One human shouldn't have that kind of power. The council has voted, and the decision is final." Thomas looked back at his dragon companion, feeling the ancient creature's growing anger through their mental link. The dragon was showing him images from its memory, scenes of architect worlds being destroyed by those who claimed to be friends and allies. "I won't go," Thomas said quietly, but his words carried across the field with surprising strength. "The dragons chose me to protect their legacy, not to let it be turned into weapons for the Coalition." Harrington signaled to his troops, who began advancing with their energy rifles raised. "Son, you can come voluntarily or we can make you come. But either way, you're leaving this planet today." That's when the first dragon moved. Thomas's companion rose to its full height, towering over the Coalition soldiers like a living mountain of crystal and light. Its eyes blazed with internal fire, and when it opened its mouth, a sound like distant thunder rolled across the field. The other dragons responded immediately, their forms beginning to pulse with energy that made the air itself shimmer. The Coalition Marines stopped their advance, suddenly realizing that their weapons might not be adequate for creatures of this size and power. "Stand down," Harrington shouted, but it was too late. The dragons didn't attack the soldiers directly. Instead, they released focused energy pulses that disabled every piece of Coalition technology within a mile radius. Weapons stopped working, armor systems failed, and the great warships that had seemed so threatening moments before now sat powerless in the fields like giant paperweights. Thomas felt the dragons' restraint through their mental connection. They could have destroyed the entire fleet in seconds, but they chose to simply neutralize the threat instead of causing unnecessary death. Admiral Harrington stared in shock as his elite Marines stood helplessly with useless weapons, while his mighty warships sat dark and silent. In 30 years of military service, he had never been so completely outmatched. "This isn't over," he told Thomas, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "The Coalition won't ignore this. More ships will come." Thomas nodded sadly, understanding that his peaceful life on Verdun Prime was ending forever. The dragons were showing him other worlds, other sites where their kind waited in hidden chambers. The galaxy was about to remember what it had tried so hard to forget. News of Admiral Harrington's defeated fleet spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. In the Coalition capital on New Geneva, President Margaret Blackwood paced her office while emergency session reports flooded her desk. The images from Verdun Prime showed Coalition warships sitting powerless in farm fields, their crews unharmed but completely helpless against the ancient dragon constructs. "How is this possible?" she demanded, addressing the emergency council through holographic displays. "Our most advanced fleet disabled by one farm boy and his pets?" Senator David Harrison, chairman of the Defense Committee, looked grim as he reviewed intelligence reports. "Madam President, we're receiving similar reports from 17 other worlds. Dragon constructs are emerging from underground sites across Coalition space. All of them appear to be responding to this Thomas person somehow." On Verdun Prime, Thomas stood in the middle of what had become a war camp. The disabled Coalition ships surrounded him like metal monuments to military failure, while his dragon companions rested peacefully in the fields beyond. But Thomas no longer looked like the simple stable boy who had fed cattle just weeks before. His eyes now carried the same luminous quality as the dragons, and when he moved, energy seemed to ripple around him like heat waves. "The other sites are awakening," he told Peter and Emma, his voice carrying harmonics that made their bones vibrate slightly. "The dragons were never just on this world. They're everywhere, sleeping under the ground on every planet the architects touched." Emma watched her boyfriend with growing concern. Each day he seemed more distant, more connected to the ancient creatures than to the humans around him. "Thomas, you're changing. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you move. Are you still you?" Thomas reached out and touched her face gently, his hand warm with the same energy that flowed through the dragons. "I'm still me, Emma. But I'm also something more now." The architects left part of themselves in their bloodline, waiting for someone who could carry their legacy forward. Dr. Crawford approached with his latest readings, his scientific excitement barely contained despite the dangerous situation. "Thomas, the quantum signatures we're detecting suggest that the Dragon network spans thousands of light years. They're all connected somehow, sharing information instantaneously across galactic distances." Through his connection with the dragons, Thomas could see it all. Ancient sites coming alive on worlds throughout Coalition space as his awakening triggered a cascade effect. On the industrial planet of Kepler-7, 3 massive dragons had emerged from beneath the factories, their presence causing all the mining equipment to shut down. On the resort world of Paradiso, dragon constructs rose from the ocean depths, their crystalline forms creating new islands of impossible beauty. But not everyone welcomed the awakening. Captain Sarah Mitchell, commanding the Coalition's newest battleship Retribution, led a task force of 40 ships toward the Kepler-7 site. She had built her career on tactical brilliance and refused to accept that humanity's greatest fleet could be stopped by ancient machines. "All ships maintain formation," she broadcast to her fleet. "We're going to end this threat before it spreads any further. Target the largest dragon construct and fire on my command." The dragons on Kepler-7 sensed the approaching threat long before the ships arrived. Through their quantum network they shared the information with Thomas on Verdun Prime, who felt their distress like a physical pain. "They're going to attack Kepler-7, Thomas told his companions, his luminous eyes reflecting visions of distant space. "Captain Mitchell thinks she can destroy the dragons with conventional weapons." Peter watched his childhood friend with growing amazement and fear. "Can you stop them? I mean, can you help the dragons defend themselves?" Thomas closed his eyes and reached out through the quantum network that connected all the dragon sites. His consciousness flowed across light years in an instant, touching the minds of dragons on dozens of worlds. He could feel their power, their willingness to protect not just themselves but the innocent people caught in the crossfire of galactic politics. The battle at Kepler 7 lasted exactly 17 minutes. Captain Mitchell's fleet opened fire with everything they had, their energy beams and missile salvos creating a light show visible from orbit. But the dragons didn't just defend themselves, they rewrote the rules of combat entirely. The dragon constructs phased out of normal spacetime, becoming translucent ghosts that weapons passed through harmlessly. Then they reappeared inside the coalition ship's shields, their mere presence overloading every system on board. One by one, the great warships went dark and began drifting powerlessly through space. Captain Mitchell found herself sitting in a dead ship, all her tactical displays showing nothing but static. Outside her viewport, a dragon floated peacefully, its crystalline head tilted as if studying her with curiosity rather than hostility. Back on Verdant Prime, Thomas opened his eyes with tears streaming down his face. The battle had been won without a single death, but he could feel the galaxy's fear growing stronger with each passing hour. "They'll never stop coming," he said quietly. "The Coalition Council will send bigger fleets, more weapons. They can't accept that there's something in the universe more powerful than their politics." Admiral Harrington, still stranded on Verdant Prime with his disabled fleet, had been watching Thomas carefully. "Son, you could end this right now. One word from you could shut down every coalition ship in space. Why don't you?" Thomas looked at the old soldier with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "Because that's not what the architects would have wanted. They created, they didn't destroy. If I'm going to carry their legacy, I have to do better than just winning battles." But even as he spoke, Thomas could feel the Dragon Network preparing for something larger. The galaxy's rulers had made their choice, and now the awakened Guardians would make theirs. 6 months had passed since the first dragon emerged from the depths of Verdant Prime, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Thomas stood on the observation deck of the ancient architect citadel on Kepler Prime, looking out at a world that had been transformed from barren rock to flourishing paradise in just 3 days. Gardens of impossible beauty stretched to the horizon, their plants glowing softly with the same crystalline light that flowed through the dragons. Behind him, representatives from dozens of worlds waited in the great assembly hall. Some came willingly, eager to learn about the technologies that could end hunger and disease across their planets. Others attended reluctantly, their governments forced to negotiate after their military forces proved helpless against the awakened Dragon Network. "Are you ready for this?" Emma asked, adjusting the simple clothes Thomas insisted on wearing despite his new status as the most powerful person in the galaxy. She had chosen to undergo the genetic awakening process 2 months earlier, and now her eyes held the same luminous quality as his, though not as bright. Thomas nodded, feeling the presence of dragons throughout the citadel and across the planet's surface. They had built this place in just weeks, using architect technology to reshape matter at the atomic level. Every stone sang with harmonious energy, and the air itself felt alive with possibility. "The hardest part is behind us," he said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. Changing the galaxy's power structure had been simple compared to changing people's hearts and minds. In the assembly hall, former Admiral Harrington sat in the front row wearing civilian clothes. His military career had ended when the coalition dissolved 3 months earlier, but Thomas had offered him a new purpose as coordinator for planetary defense systems. The old soldier's experience with warfare had proven valuable in preventing conflicts as worlds adjusted to the new reality. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings from across the galaxy," Thomas began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall without amplification. 6 months ago, I was feeding cattle on a farming colony. I had dreams of something bigger, but I never imagined anything like this." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the audience. Despite commanding power that could reshape stars, Thomas had never lost his simple manner of speaking or his farmer's practical wisdom. "The dragons didn't choose me because I was special," he continued. "They chose me because I was ready to listen. The architects left their legacy in all of us, waiting for someone who would use it to build rather than destroy." Dr. Crawford, now head of the new Galactic Research Institute, nodded approvingly from his seat. Over the past months he had documented technologies that could cure any known disease, extend lifespans indefinitely, and provide unlimited clean energy. All of it was being shared freely with any world that agreed to the Architect Accords. The Centaurian Republic was among the first to sign, Thomas said, gesturing toward Governor Michael Stone, whose people had embraced the new technologies with enthusiasm. Their worlds now produce enough food to feed 10 times their population, and they're sharing that abundance with neighboring systems. Not everyone had been so quick to accept the changes. The Rigel Confederation, under General Patricia Lewis, had resisted for months before finally agreeing to lay down their weapons in exchange for technologies that made their warrior culture unnecessary. Why fight for resources when matter itself could be transformed into anything needed? Change is never easy, Thomas acknowledged, looking directly at some of the more skeptical delegates. The architects understood this. That's why they left guardians to protect their knowledge until the right time came. A holographic display showed scenes from across the galaxy. Dead worlds blooming with new life in a matter of days. Space stations that had struggled with failing life support systems now surrounded by gardens that produced fresh air and water. Entire populations freed from the daily struggle for survival, able to pursue art, science, and philosophy instead. But this isn't about me ruling over you, Thomas said, his voice carrying the certainty that came from communion with ancient wisdom. The dragons don't serve me because they have to. They serve because they choose to, because they believe in what we're building together. Emma watched from the side of the hall as Thomas addressed concerns from various delegates. A representative from the mining guild worried about economic collapse if matter could be transformed at will. Thomas showed them recordings of former miners who had become planetary gardeners, using architect tools to create beauty instead of extracting resources. A delegate from the Medical Association questioned whether extending lifespans indefinitely might cause overpopulation. Thomas responded by showing them worlds where the architects had lived, places where billions of beings coexisted in harmony for millions of years, their technology allowing them to expand into space itself when needed. The age of scarcity is ending, Thomas declared as his presentation reached its conclusion. For the first time in galactic history we have enough. Enough food, enough energy, enough space, enough time. The question now is what we'll do with that abundance. Peter, now serving as Thomas's chief advisor despite having no formal education beyond basic colony schooling, watched his childhood friend address the galaxy's leaders with quiet pride. The stable boy who used to dream about the stars had become their shepherd, guiding not just humanity but dozens of species toward a future none of them could have imagined. As the assembly ended and delegates began discussing implementation details with their various committees, Thomas stepped outside onto a balcony overlooking the transformed landscape of Kepler Prime. Dragons soared through skies that sparkled with auroras of pure energy, while below them, beings from across the galaxy worked together in gardens that would feed worlds. Emma joined him, taking his hand as they watched the sunset paint the crystalline spires of the citadel in shades of gold and amber. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "The simple life before all this?" Thomas smiled, feeling the contentment of dragons at rest and the dreams of civilizations learning to grow beyond their old limitations. "Every farmer knows," he said, "that the best crops come from the richest soil. We're planting seeds now that will bloom for generations."